And so we will just get started. So my first question to you, Dr. Mehrotra, is that, I saw that you did your BTech IIT Kharagpur chemical engineering, and within 2 years, you sort of went out for an MBA, and that's a very rare sort of sequence in those years. So can you tell me a little bit about how that happened?
Actually, Alwin, back then, it was quite common for IIT graduates to go straight into an MBA platform. And at the time, I did the usual. There was the CAT exams and so on. I got through those as well, but I got an offer from a very small liberal arts college in Florida, which seemed quite interesting, quite exciting. So I accepted that offer instead of going to an Indian IIM. And that was an interesting time in Florida. This was a time when US banking was extremely fragmented. So, interstate banking, as you might imagine, exists in India, did not exist in the US at the time. So, that was quite an eye opener in many ways to see what's going on there. Now, your question was why I jumped straight into the MBA without really working, as is more normal these days, as is more common these days. And the answer, as I said back then, this actually may have been the norm back then.
I hear that,
So obviously, this is a generation prior to yours.
right.
So yeah.
So I remember that most of the students at that time used to definitely do the MS. So actually, what surprised me was that you went in for an MBA. I would have thought that post your chemical engineering, MS might have been one of those calling, but I think you decided. So how did you decide? Because looks like you were looking at the IIMs as well at that time.
Yes, I did look at the IIMs. I got admitted there as well. But why not MS? And this was something even at while I was at IIT, I actually enjoyed the small sprinkling of economics offerings that we had in the curriculum at the time. That has since increased, but at that time, we just had a course in microeconomics, a course in macro, and I really enjoyed those. So I started reading up on my own. I would go to the library in the main institute building and start digging up these management journals, and it fascinated me what was going on. The thing is, with an engineering background and training, you can see the science behind the management. You yourself have a management degree, so you can see that this is not a leap. It is a connection that actually is very useful to have an engineering quantitative background and then supplement that with the management background. And even within management, if you were to choose something like what I did, which was finance, then all of a sudden, all of the maths that you have done starts to come in useful. Those little arrows you have in your quiver start to take more aim at that point.
So how did you transition into academics? Tell us about your journey in academics and why did you choose a path in this in academia?
That happened a bit later. Well, while I was doing my MBA, the courses that really interested me, really fascinated me, were the finance courses, the courses in financial economics, in mergers and acquisitions. And I felt that I want to learn a little bit more about how the world of corporate finance works. And so I talked to some of the professors there, and they said, why don't you go for a graduate degree? And I was really in no hurry to join the private sector. So I applied to a few universities. The way I did my applications was I looked at whether or not the faculty members were represented in the top academic journals. Mm-hmm. And that sort of decided my shortlist of applications, and ended up at the University of Oregon, which was very strong in corporate finance at the time, still is. So that's kind of the journey from MBA, which obviously I did not join MBA thinking I'm going to end up in academia. I joined MBA thinking this engineering plus MBA would be a good segue into the private sector. But as I took additional courses, there was a pivot, and that pivot, I think, was, in retrospect, a good one.
I mean, you can say that after 30 years in a singular institution. I mean, that's extremely rare. I mean, I've maybe two or three people I'm aware of who have spent 30 years in an institution, and you sort of started off as a professor of finance, and then I think you became the dean of the MBA programs, and
Yes.
and now you're a dean, and now you're the dean of the school from April 2023. So, congratulations on this phenomenal journey. I mean,
Thank you.
please tell us, what does it take to make something like this happen?
So yeah, a couple of questions embedded in your question there, which is the first. I've been here a long time, 30 years. That is unusual, particularly in academia. People are a bit more footloose than I was. So the fact that I have stayed here that long is a number of factors. One is that I really like the city. It's a city that I live in Edmonton, to put that on the table, and it is not like Paris or one of those more extraordinarily beautiful cities that is love at first sight. Edmonton is in northern Alberta. This is a rather cold climate city, but it grows on you slowly, and before you know it, you start enjoying the nooks and crannies that the city offers to you. So that was one reason. The second reason was that I had a really good set of colleagues here with whom I established a research partnership collaboration working with them. And this is crucial in our world. They do mean it when they say publish or perish. They actually mean every word of that. So, and you went to Wharton, so you know exactly what
Right.
that means. So that was another reason I stayed here. Now, I didn't stay here forever throughout that period. I spent a year at the Institute for Economic Research in Tokyo, at Hitotsubashi University. That was actually a very good place to be. We got some really interesting data from which I've had three really good research publications. Then I spent 1 year at the University of North Carolina teaching in the MBA program at Chapel Hill. So there were periods of that we traveled to other universities, but at the end of the day, University of Alberta always pulled me back. Second, my wife also was teaching here, so that also meant she had found a good appointment teaching Japanese language at the university. So all said and done, it was good to be in a university that valued research, that was globally recognized, and unless there was a strong reason to move, I didn't feel compelled to do so.
So, in general, there is this expectation in academia of cross-pollination, and that's one of the reasons professors spend a few years elsewhere, and that's what is very surprising to me, that it's extremely rare for you to sort of be there and lead. You can be there and perish is something that usually gets seen. So what would you advise to people? Because in the rush, sometimes even other faculties, they sort of, with respect to keeping their career on the move, they do make some of these moves, and they're not always happy with the moves that they have made. And so any advice to them, that if they really want a stable, long-lasting, successful stint at a place of their choice, what would they need to do?
So again, this would be again based on my opinion. So take that with a pinch of salt, if you will. So this is, in my opinion, the most important thing in deciding where you want to spend your career is looking at whether your contributions are valued, and whether you have an opportunity, whether you have by opportunity I mean the infrastructure is there to help you succeed. if that is there, don't be in a hurry to jump elsewhere. Every time you jump elsewhere, there's a startup cost, there's a lead time to get set up, to build a new network of friends, to understand a new culture. And sometimes it works, sometimes it might actually set you back at least by a number of years. So I'm not saying that don't do that. In some cases, it might be the best move you have made. I have a sample of one, which is me. And in that sample of one, it has worked out for me. Now, having said that, I still think it is important to go and travel and spend time elsewhere. Like you said, the cross-pollination bit is important. You don't want to be stuck in an echo chamber.
Exactly.
So traveling allows you to pierce through that bubble that academics are quite fond of having these comfortable bubbles around them. Traveling to other universities changes that. So as I said, some of my best research ideas came from spending a year at the Institute for Economic Research in Tokyo. And that was as much of a cross-pollination as you can imagine. Different language, different university, different culture.
Right.
Those were the places, like we discovered, to give you a 30-second example, Japan is one of the countries with the highest adoption rates in the world, along with the US. But unlike the US, where the adoptees are typically babies, in Japan, the adoptees are 28-year-old men. Now, this would be news to you, I imagine.
It is. Background notwithstanding, this is news.
So you might think, why is this the case?
Yeah.
Well, some of this is cultural, some of this is used for succession planning. So, you know, the company established by Mr. Isamu Suzuki, which is quite famous in India, the Maruti company.
Yeah, right.
So Mr. Isamu himself was adopted.
Right.
In fact, every single CEO of Suzuki up until Mr. Isamu has been adopted into the Suzuki family.
Oh, I see. Wow.
So these are interesting ideas that had I been sitting here in Canada, I would have never known that. And then I started interviewing other businesses. And if you look at the oldest surviving businesses in the world, about more than 50% of them would be Japanese from one country. And so this plays a role there, this ability to adopt, older males into the family allows firms to survive multiple generations, sometimes hundreds of years. So we stayed in an inn in Japan, which had been operating in the same family for 700 years.
Wow.
So again, these are research ideas that you only get by immersing yourself in a different place. Obviously, it was hard getting all of the data, first of all, collecting it. So we needed to have someone who could read and write Japanese. We needed to have eventually all the data transcribed into machine readable format. We ended up sending it to actually a company in Bangalore to get it all transcribed into Excel. And then it got published in the top journal in finance, Journal of Financial Economics. We were interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, by Freakonomics, by Financial Times. So that cross-pollination bit you mentioned, I would strongly advise, if you are in academia, look into that. Even if you stay in one geographical location, try and widen the scope of your research radar as much as you can. You never know what you'll catch.
That's very fascinating. How did you interview all of these people? I'm assuming this, what would have come across as a regularity to Japanese, that it was a eye-opening statement for you. So how were you able to then tease out the CEOs of these firms to talk to you?
So two things. One, we were not talking to CEOs. This was all driven by archival data.
Oh, I see.
So we go all the way from when the Japanese stock exchanges opened after the war. This would be 1949. The Tokyo Stock Exchange reopened then. So our data span 1949 to 2000, and then till 2010. And then all companies that were ever listed in any of the stock exchanges in Japan, including Tokyo, Osaka, etc. We had data on all of these companies. What struck us was that in many instances, when we are looking for successions, we noticed that the heir's last name did not match the founder's last name.
Mhm.
And that sort of had us scratching our heads that what exactly is going on. And none of my team, my research team, were Japanese. We had Randall Mock, who's my colleague here in Alberta. Yupana, she was a professor there, but she's from Thailand. She's currently at the National University of Singapore and a PhD student. So the three of us plus a PhD student, and none of whom were Japanese. So we are saying, what exactly is going on when the heir's last name doesn't match the founder's name? So we said, let's take a time out. Let's talk to a Japanese professor. So we met some senior Japanese professors there, and they were quite nonchalant about it. They said, well, this is quite common here that you adopt adults into the family. And that all of a sudden we knew we were onto something, because
Right.
this has not been even known to the Western
That's
academic.
Mhm.
So that's how it went. And then the Japanese are really, really good at recording data in almanacs and so on. So we had an innovation center at Hitotsubashi University. It's one of the top 5 universities in Japan, so quite well endowed. And so we got all of the almanacs from there with all of the family histories of all of the listed firms. It took a long time to get all of that data. If I was to put we actually got some of the data on forklifts. They were that much data.
Okay. Wow.
So
Okay.
it took a while.
Hmm.
And so you were saying interviews. No, we didn't have the time to
Hmm.
interview the CEOs. This was all done using archival data and machine readable, using statistical software like Stata and so on.
Okay. Moving from Japan to China. So, as an associate dean, you were instrumental in launching the Masters in Financial Management in Shenzhen, China. It's very rare that a Western university gets a chance to have a foothold in China. So, can you describe to us some of the challenges and successes you have encountered in this endeavor, and what were your key learnings?
So yes, you're absolutely right. It isn't. We don't have that many Western universities that have a foothold in China, but we are not the only ones. Having said that, some of the top American universities are there. Some Australian universities are there as well. When we went in, this was about 14 years ago. Our goal was to start a master's in financial management, a master's in finance program, a very quantitative program that's kind of based on managing paper. And when I say paper, I mean short-term securities, bonds, and so on. So we were looking at a few cities, and the usual suspects come up, which is Beijing, Shanghai. But then we noticed Beijing, Shanghai already have strong programs by top American universities, and establishing a foothold would be a bit more of a challenge there. By contrast, Shenzhen, which is a newer city in China, the city didn't even exist before the 1970s. There were rice paddies there. But all of a sudden, this city showed tremendous promise. It was a banking center. The Shenzhen Stock Exchange today is the second largest in China. It is the IT center, the unequivocal. It is sort of the Bangalore of China. It is the IT center for China. All the big IT firms are there, including Tencent and so on. And it had very easy access internationally. You could fly into Hong Kong, literally drive across the bay, and half an hour later, you'll be checked into your hotel in Shenzhen. So the next step was finding a partner, and we restricted ourselves to what's called the C9 list, the Chinese 9, the top 9 in China. And luckily, as luck would have it, we had long-standing relationships with the university slightly west of the coast in a city called Xi'an. Xi'an is actually a very ancient city. It goes back to the Tang Dynasty. It was the capital also at that time. It's a lovely city. And Xi'an Jiaotong University was our partner in many other ways. So we decided to talk to them first. and they were very keen to partner with us. So the next steps then were to chalk out the details. How will we deliver the program? And we decided to deliver the program 100% in China in English. So that means we had to interview all of the applicants in English to make sure that English fluency was up to par, and then decide the curriculum, decide how the Xi'an Jiaotong faculty and our faculty would teach these courses, and finally get approval from our university and their university, and finally get approval from the Chinese Ministry of Education. So all of these things took time. I would say from the first inception of the idea to actually launching the program, it took 3 years.
Okay.
But now it is very successful. It was ranked 2 in China, and it is an ongoing program that is running at capacity. So we are very happy that we were an early mover there, and it's one of my favorite places to be as well. Shenzhen is a lovely city to visit.
So, coming back to cross-pollination, I see that you have phenomenal experiences in Japan. You've set up an institution in China. And now that you're the dean, which parts of the world are you bringing into Alberta?
I think I'm looking very closely at where you are, Allwin. And I have some very close friends in higher ed in India who are associated with setting up universities there. I'm in conversations with them. And our university itself is very keen on pivoting to India in a big way. We obviously will stay in China. That's a wonderful program. We have some of the best students we've had. We have a strong list of alumni there, and we love being there. But at the same time, if you look at the GDP per capita profile of India, it is in the same ballpark where China was about a decade or a bit more than a decade ago.
Almost 2 decades ago, you're right.
I would say 15 years ago, you
Yes.
could map the GDP per capita exactly where China was 15 years ago.
Right.
So in many ways, I see India as a wonderful opportunity right now. The middle class is growing at an exponential rate in India. What the middle class needs is access to higher education. The capacity at higher education hasn't grown commensurately with that. And hence, we are seeing it here in Canada. Applications from India have really quadrupled in a short period of time. And we're going to see more of that as the middle class competes for I wouldn't call it shrinking, but a higher ed space in India that is not growing at the same rate as the demand by the middle class. So I really suspect that opportunities for expansion in higher ed in India are only going to get stronger as we go forward. And I have many different ideas in mind. I don't know what will be the best way to do it. But for example, we're going to stay focused on the BCom program. Within the BCom program, we want to stay focused on programs that are quantitatively oriented, that have a strong component for management and business analytics.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Because we have a center here in the University of Alberta called CMI, the Center for Machine Intelligence Institute. That's rated one of the top in the world. So the CMI is basically, think of this as machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we have been in strong conversations with the folks at CMI. And they are essentially, when we go ahead and design programs in management and business analytics, it is going to be informed, not just informed, it's going to have components directly from the AI sector, AI for business. In the second year, you could do AI for health analytics if you want to work in the health sector, and so on. So we think if we design a program in that manner, there'll be a huge demand for students from India.
That does make sense. I mean, India does suffer from the challenge where, higher quality is still a constraint in terms of numbers. Even the best of the institutions have a rather limited intake, and they're not quite able to cater to the growing needs. So it does make sense to look at India. I think setting up here comes with its own unique set of challenges, but I think If you have been able to set it up in China, I think India would be a little easier.
And with my own background, that should be a less of a challenge.
Yes, exactly.
The key to India is to understand what do Indian students want, what is good for their careers. And I honestly think the BCom program that is with a strong component of analytics is a way. We already have that here, so
Right.
we are not reinventing wheels here.
No, which is a nice segue into my next question, because the finance sector is evolving with new trends that are shaping the industry. With respect to the MBA, we are seeing mostly impact coming from the areas of AI, blockchain, fintech. And now you're also talking about how your BCom program is also looking at very similar areas of tech and finance fusing together. So coming to my question, right, how do you expect the impact on MBA programs to be in the coming years with respect to the changes in the financial space?
Big changes. You mentioned blockchains. Blockchains are kind of old news in the face of the onslaught by AI these days. But blockchains are they have been on the shelf for some of the largest central banks in the world for a long time now. I would say at least 5 or 6 years.
Right.
So there have been, for example, I know the Bank of Canada, the Monetary Authority in Singapore, the Bank of Japan, they are actually talking to each other. Now, I don't know exactly what the purpose of them looking at cryptos which are separate from blockchains. But I suspect one of the reasons they are in conversation with each other regarding the cryptocurrencies and so on is to make sure that they are not blindsided by new developments. All of a sudden, they don't want to lose currencies. Currencies are all Western currencies are fiat currencies. None of them are backed by any metal or anything like that.
Right.
So, being fiat currencies, there is a small danger that you might lose control if you are supplanted by, let's say, a crypto based on blockchains that is universally accepted. We are not there yet. So the central banks are very aware of this. They want to keep things on the shelf that if needed, they can bring it out. They keep the powder as dry as possible in that regard. I don't think they are replacing the Canadian dollar with a crypto dollar anytime soon. But they're still looking into it. So when you talk about the MBA in finance and so on, everyone has to be aware that technology for fintech obviously is big in India. Fintech is big in China. Fintech is not as big in Western countries, the US and Canada, for example. And there are good reasons for that. For example, in many countries where fintech has really leapfrogged paper currency and so on, is that paper currency was getting increasingly difficult to manage. That is not the case here yet. I mean, I can see the younger generation. My daughter hardly uses paper money anymore. But at the same time, in China, you'd actually find it difficult to use paper money. If you're in a coffee shop in China, good luck buying coffee with paper. You cannot.
Yeah, without WeChat or any of those apps, you can't make any payments whatsoever.
No. So what I'm trying to get here at here is that as MBA students coming out, you have to be prepared for unpredictable things. You have to be prepared for these, again, to use a cliched word, for disruptions that can occur from any side. So that means the analytics things that I mentioned a bit earlier to you, the analytics informed by AI, all of these things are no longer considered fashionable electives. They are integral to the program now. If you are, businesses are demanding this. So if you're not prepared in these areas, then essentially you are, I wouldn't call it ruling yourself out of the market, but your resume then goes into a different pile.
So a lot of businesses nowadays are very critical of the MBA program. And the reason is they say, and I'm paraphrasing here, and what they're saying is that it's not about managing people anymore. We actually want people to get shit done. And sort of this, expectation shift has not happened within schools. So students are still graduating and then hoping in some sense that they would get these jobs where they are able to manage people. And so, companies like Tesla are coming out and saying, listen, you don't want to hire MBAs anymore. But I think what's happening is they're saying, listen, we want people to come down and actually help us functionally out, and then, continue the growth in the organization. And so, how are you looking at that? I mean, are you sensing any of that in the markets that you're in? And what is your take on evolving the program or the culture, or how a student has to be in this day and age?
So what we are hearing, maybe something similar to what you're hearing there as well. What we're hearing from our employers is that there seems to be a greater concentration among students in either quant skills or people skills. And businesses are saying, that's not good. We want students to be spanning the two. Mm-hmm. So as we train students in one area, let's say business analytics, and they come out well trained in visualizing data and managing data and so on, but they're not as good now in people skills, then the businesses have to now take that on their own and start training them in that area. So what we are doing here is we are going the way of what we call micro-credentialing. And these micro-credentialing are getting very, is not just us, it's actually a very common trend across North America. Mm-hmm. And these micro-credentialing then allow you to, let's say we had a very strong program in leadership. So while you're doing your analytics on the side, you cobble together a series of courses at the end of which you get a certificate in leadership. So that way, if you and vice versa too, if you're strong on the people side, you can do a micro-credentialing in AI. Mm-hmm. So when you graduate, then these certificates, or even if you have one, that is a strong signal to employers that you have at least understood the need to broaden your resume. So you're absolutely right that the emphasis on the quant side cannot come at the expense of managing people, of having a greater understanding of organization theory, and vice versa. A greater understanding of organizations should not come at the expense of lightening yourself on the quant side. It has to be, if you can't juggle two balls in the air at any given time, you should not be doing an MBA.
Are you sure that incoming students are generally aware of this? And that's and this is an ongoing conversation I'm having with deans, because they feel that students have a little, I think the expectations towards the MBA has not changed. People expect to go in and come out after 2 years and have a good company waiting for them on the other side. And most of the deans are now telling me that's not as straightforward as it used to be 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. And so what should the message to students be? How do they need to now view the MBA program, according to you?
I'm not sure. I have not seen polls and surveys about changes in the students' outlook towards MBAs, what the expectations are. So I'm going to take your word for it that students are still sort of wedded to the older mindset. I suspect students are very quick learners. So they read the popular press, they read books, they read journal articles, they talk to people, they are obviously on social media, LinkedIn and so on. So they will be very quick to cotton on to any changes, any shifts, any paradigm shifts that are happening. Now, having said that, as deans, it's still our responsibility to explain at the admission time that when you choose programs on the basis of what the content of the program is. Don't go simply by where other students are applying. That becomes that's what we call the gravity model. The gravity model is not as open, is not as informative to you as doing your own research on the content of the program. If you read all of the top MBA programs, they have excellent websites. They will explain to you what they are doing in terms of innovative stuff. And the innovative stuff is what you need to be reading, sometimes perhaps between the lines, but it is there. The information is there. Everything that I've told you is there on our website. So I'm not telling you anything new in this interview. But if you're a student, it's on you. The onus is on you to do some homework. Don't apply to 100 places, apply to 5 places, but study deeply what these 5 places are doing. Spend hours on each before you send your applications. And you'll find a place that really works for you. You will find the place that really works for you.
So COVID-19 brought in this huge push of technology, and we saw a lot of institutions take dramatic steps. Some set up studios, some went online. And interestingly, some of them have been able to continue to keep the momentum up, but a lot of them have now scaled back and said, you know what, I think offline is best. So having been through that entire period, what are your thoughts on evolving education online in today's world, especially when a student is now sort of looking for some level of convenience, which wasn't expected 5 years ago, but now that does exist?
So the online bit, I'm sympathetic to the criticism that online education cannot replace in-person education for a number of reasons. First, with online, especially if it's not synchronous, a lot of the onus is shifted onto the students. And sometimes what you learn in the MBA program doesn't come from the lecture itself, it comes from interacting with other students. You can still do all of the interactions online. Obviously, online has also kept up with that, but it's not the same. It's a different experience to be in the classroom, interact with students, have teams. In fact, that's the direction that we are going. Many of our courses are no longer limited to lectures now. For example, one of the courses we are doing is called the Impact Series. And this Impact Series, we have students that work with the city, that work directly with the city in projects like one of the projects called the Grand Challenge. And the cities, as you know, at least in North America, the cities are still struggling to get back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of commercial activity, even commercial occupancy in buildings. We are still below 50%. So the cities are very keen to have students interact with them, have a larger group of young students attack these problems, understand these problems, come up with solutions. That's all part of the curriculum now. This is not something you do as a vocation. This is all part of the MBA curriculum, of the BCom, even the BCom curriculum. So what this means is if you were doing online, you would miss all of this. You will not be able to interact with a more immersive experience. And that immersive experience, I think, is crucial. And that is what is increasingly going to distinguish the strong programs from the programs that have largely or perhaps sometimes only an online presence. I'm not saying we abandon the online presence, but I'm saying we should use it judiciously, not in a way that is inflicted on you because of, let's say, the world shutting down because of COVID. We didn't have a choice then. Now we have a choice.
So when it comes to placements nowadays, business schools what do you think are the top couple of challenges that business schools are facing? And can you just, tell us how you are sort of looking to at least address some of it, especially when placing your students with some of the top brands out there?
So placement is always the key for if you're an MBA student, at the end of the day, you want a strong placement. That's why you're here. That's why you're saving up to get into a good MBA program. Now, placement to a large extent depends on where you want to be placed. So for many of our MBA students who are from Edmonton or Calgary, there is a strong desire to look for jobs in the state, in the province, in Calgary and so on, for familiarity. Or perhaps go somewhere nearby, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and so on. We can't change that. That's the students' preferences. and that would remain the case. What we're also noticing is that many of the international students who are coming in, there's a desire to stay back in Canada. And that's good news for us. That's good news for us at many levels. It's good news for us. Obviously, the businesses are happy. Businesses are struggling. There's a huge demand for well-trained MBA students, particularly those who are trained in analytics. So placement is not an issue if you're trained in that regard at all. There's a huge support by the governments in Canada. Every provincial government is providing support to have students come to their province. As you know, Canada is an immigrant country. So in that sense, if you're applying for programs, if you're a student in India, you want to apply for programs in the UK, in Canada, in the US, Singapore, etc., one of the things you have to ask yourself is, which country has the best policies by the government so that your placement is not a struggle. Your placement is actually a welcome, both by the businesses as well as the governments. The businesses are not fighting the government.
Right.
So for us, at least in Canada, at the top 5 or 6 universities in Canada, we belong to the group of the top 5 in Canada. This is not an issue. We fully understand that placement works in collaborating with businesses, governments. Everything has to come together. And luckily for us, the stars are aligned right now.
Okay, fantastic. So as so many students apply to you, what are the top 2 or 3 traits that you look for while you're selecting a candidate and you feel is the right candidate for admission to the Alberta School?
So what we are looking for, number one, is some sort of an initiative. When you apply to us, what is your reason for applying for the program? And that's very critical. Of course, we also look at your GMAT score, which is an indication of how much preparation you have done to get into the program. We fully understand that you can prepare for these exams, but that's a good thing. It means you're committed to this. It means that you are taking it seriously. So hence, the GMAT becomes correlated with a signal of your intent. At the same time, we're also looking at, do you have work experience? You started out with this question. This was not an issue 40 years ago or 30 years ago. It is an issue now. We want students to have work experience so that when they come into the classroom, they can start relating the theory to what they have seen happen in businesses. So without work experience, you're not even considered for admissions. So that's a given. That's not even putting you at an advantage. That's everyone who applies has that minimum work experience. On top of that, we're looking at proficiency in to put it simply, in English, which obviously is not a challenge for Indians, but for students who come in from other countries, that does become a challenge. We're also looking for proficiency in on the quant side. That are you able to deal with? You come into the first year of the MBA program, and you're in a statistics course. Can you handle that? So all of these things is the totality of all of these things that the admissions committee looks at and makes a decision.
So I understand that a lot of Indian MBA students apply to your school. Any advice that you can give for these candidates to stand out so that they have a higher chance of acceptance?
I don't know about higher chance of acceptance. I think it's all because I'm not part of the admissions committee, and I will obviously not speak for them. That's I have my own views, and these are my own views, but this is not trying to put my finger on the admission committee's scales. That's their job.
So let me rephrase my question. It's not about trying to figure out. It's more like, who might be an even better fit for Alberta? Who are these next set of higher quality students that, would make sense for you? Because you're already getting a pool. You're already getting some good qualified students. So who might they be, according to you?
So in that regard, look at the local economy here. At the moment, Alberta's economy is largely an energy plus agriculture economy. Now, energy and agriculture is not what it was 10 years ago. Some of the largest green tech investments in energy is happening right here in Alberta. 3/4 of the national green tech investments in the energy sector is happening right here in Alberta. So if you are a student in India with any interest in working in the energy sector, this would be a good place for you to apply to. You'd have a slight leg up with respect to other applicants because you have a better fit with the economy here. If you have some background working with early stage financing, that would be a huge benefit. We are part of a very successful creative destruction lab, which is a franchise out of the University of Toronto. At the moment, this is run through the Haskins School at the University of Calgary. The director of the program is one of our colleagues here at the University of Alberta. Very successful program. So if you're interested in early stage financing, apply to the University of Alberta. If you've got any experience working in incubators and so on, that would be looked at positively by the admissions committee. That you've got some experience here. We have programs that you can easily segue into. If you are interested in working in high tech agriculture, that's another place you can apply here. If you're interested in artificial intelligence, we have one of the strongest AI centers in the world.
So, the question I should have asked first, I'm going to ask it last, which is, now that you're the dean at the Alberta School of Business, what are your top 2 or 3 strategic initiatives or plans for this year and beyond?
So one of the top strategic initiatives that we are launching is revamping curriculum to get more infused with strong data analytics and AI. Now, this will take a while because when we work with the Center for Machine Intelligence Institute, they are providing the com science side of the equation. We are providing the content subject expertise. And as we go forward, the strategy is to meld the two and create courses that fit specifically in sectors such as healthcare or banking that did not exist before. So that's the strategic initiative, is to get in the analytics frame of mind. The other strategic initiative that I would like to see, at least, and we are proceeding in that regard rather quickly now, is to develop a new international strategy. And our president has actually formed the International Strategy Committee. And actually, I'm the co-chair of that. So that will mean that when we look internationally, we identify sectors, we identify countries where we think we have the best shot at partnership. We don't want MOUs. There are hundreds of MOUs at every university. Instead, what we want are strong, localized partnerships with specific universities, of the kind that we did in China with the Xi'an University. That would be a template that we want to replicate elsewhere. So these are 2 of the small initiatives: internationalization of our programs, as well as getting more analytics. And not just because AI and analytics are sexy buzzwords these days. Humans have always had analytics going back to, you could go back to Sumerian granaries. People were recording how much grain they had. Right. The only thing that has changed over time is the sheer amount of data and the tools that humans have developed to understand and visualize these data. So what I'm suggesting is not rocket science. It's or neither is it surprising. It's simply a pivot that has to happen if you have going forward, if you are formulating a strategy for the next medium term.
Okay, thank you so very much, Dr. Mehrotra, for your time.